Over the years, the desire to innovate has led to some of the most groundbreaking video games out there. Portal decided to use guns for non-lethal purposes to create memorable and unique physics-based puzzles. Resident Evil limited resources, ammunitions, and inventory space to increase the feeling of dread and tension. And Metal Gear was all about avoiding confrontation instead of facing it up front. Those three games had one thing in common. They all firmly rejected people's expectations of what games should be. They were risky and ambitious. And Death Stranding is no different. But innovation has a price. And Hideo Kojima's latest game is a proof of that, as it is certainly not for everybody. Ever since the review embargo lifted, it's been clear that Death Stranding is divisive, to say the least. But whether you love it or hate it, everyone seems to agree on one particular thing though. It is unlike anything we've ever played. So today I wanted to take a look at the concept of innovation and how Kojima's insatiable thirst for change is what makes or breaks Death Stranding. Innovation has had a long history of being divisive. Whether it's in movies, music, or games, playing with audiences' expectations is like playing with fire. Because some people will simply reject change because they don't like it or feel alienated by it. Fair enough, but that's why most big video game companies love formulas, those checklists that have stood the test of time. Take open world games. The overwhelming majority of them feature side missions, districts to liberate, towers to take down, collectibles to find, and so on. RPGs feature skill trees, branching storylines, loot systems, and stats. Lots of stats. Those big AAA games that stick close to those formulas tend to be very predictable, but above all they are comfortable, familiar, and sure bets for publishers. When people are faced with something they have never experienced before, it can be challenging. It's like changing up the route back home you've been taking for your whole life. It's confusing. And don't get me wrong, I loved Arkham Knight, Watch Dogs 2, Mad Max, and Far Cry 5, even though they all basically share the same exact DNA. But straying away from normality can lead to new, insane creative expressions. Take Blade Runner, a movie so strange and deliberately slow that it received very mixed reviews when it first released, only to become the classic masterpiece it is today. Or Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, a film that will either bore you to death or bring you to tears. Games are no different. I'm sure some players wished Portal had shooting sections, as I'm sure other players would have liked to annihilate Resident Evil zombies with thousands of bullets. But unlike their rivals who didn't try to reinvent the wheel, we will still talk about them in the years to come. And I believe Death Stranding is one of those. But how does it stir things up so dramatically? Let's take a deeper look. In Death Stranding, you play as Sam Porter Bridges, a man tasked with reconnecting America following a cataclysmic event called the Death Stranding. To do so, he must travel between different outposts and cities to deliver packages and reconnect them through what is called the Chiral Network. Most developers would have simply used this premise as a narrative device for a more traditional game, like The Last of Us, which tasked the player with escorting Ellie across the United States. But Kojima decided to make it the very foundation of its core gameplay loop. He turned its story into a mechanic. So the game is in fact a walking delivery simulator, but it's not that simple. Before taking on a new delivery mission, you must plan your voyage. Which route are you going to take? How are you going to organize your cargo so that you don't hurt yourself and stumble on every rock? How many ladders and ropes should you bring? All those questions are what constitutes the moment-to-moment gameplay. And don't go around this large open world hoping to find side content and things like that, because you won't find any. Most of your time spent in Death Stranding is spent doing these very mundane tasks. For some reason, I found it strangely addictive, but I understand how some players wouldn't connect with its gameplay. This is a very bold choice, as video games are usually about one thing and one thing only: fun. And Kojima made a game about delivering packages, an actual job. But somehow it creates the perfect backdrop for exploration, one that isn't driven by typical accomplishment, but by the silence, the beauty, and poetry within this empty, desolated landscape. But that's not the end of its unusual design choices. Along the ride, you will stumble upon infrastructures built by other players, and you can also build some in return. This multiplayer component is similar to From Software's, but in a much more engaged fashion. Not only does it add to the main theme of connection, it also provides a new feeling to the player, a new type of experience, a different way to play. Kinda like the first time you encountered another player in Journey. Outside of that core gameplay loop, the game also introduces a bunch of very strange mechanics. Like soothing the baby you have attached to your chest, public bathing, drinking monsters, grimacing in the mirror, pissing, all sorts of great stuff. Those ideas might turn some players off. Much like last year's Red Dead Redemption 2, a game that wanted to push realism to a new level. Some people found its overly realistic mechanics and slow animations unbelievably tedious, and others, including myself, unbelievably immersive. But at its core, Red Dead Redemption 2 was still an open-world cowboy game with lots of shooting. So even if players felt repelled by the tedious nature of the game, they still had a fairly usual and familiar gameplay loop to fall back on. Ride, talk, shoot, repeat. And even though Death Stranding does have some more typical shooting or stealth sections, those are very few and far between. It ditches action to make traversal its main component, and not through crazy parkour stunts or wall running. No, walking. And players who are used to fast-paced action-oriented gameplay will find the game very off-putting. Gameplay-wise, Death Stranding does practically nothing like we're used to. But that bizarre gameplay loop might have fallen apart without a great narrative thread to hold it together. But fortunately, that's not the case. Death Stranding stands very tall on the shoulders of its incredibly inventive and fascinating world. In fact, I would go as far as calling it one of the best and most creative in decades, maybe ever since The Matrix. And much like that movie, people may get lost along the way. First, the game has a pretty extensive vocabulary. BTs, void outs, timefalls, dooms, and so on. Words the players won't immediately understand. It also has tons of different rules, concepts, and imagery. This limbo place called the beach, those strange babies able to see supernatural beings, the fact that you use your own blood for grenades, chiral allergies, and so much more. All those elements makes the story very complex, but most of all, incredibly original. Even some of the best stories in video games like The Last of Us or God of War follow very cinematic guidelines and structures. But Kojima rejects all that. Much like David Lynch or even Salvador Dali, he lets his imagination flow freely, without any constraints. This freedom and creativity reminded me of Donnie Darko, a film bound by the desire of its director to push the envelope further. This movie is complex, confusing, and requires multiple viewings in order to fully understand, and even then. Some will find it poorly written and deeply convoluted. Others who take the time required to unravel its mysteries will stumble upon a fascinating piece of cinema. Death Stranding creates the same kind of effect. And look, I love big summer blockbusters, but sometimes it's fun to have more challenging stories. Narratives built around layers of questions and that leave us wondering, what did I just watch? But when innovation is forced into a product, it can sometimes backfire. Some games start to go off track when trying to innovate too much. Assassin's Creed did change its decade-long formula, but as much as I had tons of fun playing its latest installments, its new systems like the arbitrary skill tree and the branching storylines still don't quite fit into the whole, as they don't make any sense within the game's historical and narrative context. Yeah, sure, they're very fun and well made, but they feel out of place. Following the success of The Witcher 3, it seems clear to me that Ubisoft simply wanted to emulate its greatest assets. But Kojima doesn't fall into this trap. He goes completely against the current and manages to deal with all these erratic and utterly different components by constantly staying close to its core idea, its main theme: connection. Even though it does a bunch of crazy things at the same time, the game is profoundly focused and rarely goes off track. Everything in the game is related to connection. Every decision in the gameplay or the story was driven by this particular idea. And whether you appreciate what Kojima attempted or not, it's refreshing to see a creator and a publisher who are willing to take such a big leap of faith. I love this game. Everything about it is different. Kojima created one of the most unique and memorable experiences in a while. Of course, it's not for everyone. His unstoppable urge to be different will certainly gather the masses to either praise him or to criticize him. Kinda like when Taxi Driver was booed at the Cannes Film Festival. Let me put it this way. Death Stranding is basically a mix between the wonders and exploration of Shadow of the Colossus and real-life hiking, with all its resources and equipment management. And if going through this while reflecting on the meaning of life and death sounds exciting to you, you're in for a treat. But proceed with caution. Change may hurt. Innovation is like suffering from a severe jet lag. You need time to adjust, but once you do, what awaits you is truly something else. Instead of creating a simple piece of entertainment, Kojima made a piece of art, and much like going to a museum, you may love it or fall asleep along the way. Thank you guys for watching my take on Death Stranding. This game is very strange, but if that's your thing, you'll have a great time. Next up is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I'm super excited to play it and to share my thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and to drop a like. I'll see you guys later.